Well, I can't see you, but I know you're there. I'm absolutely honored to be here. I really am. And I have to say to Michael and the TED conference organizers, you should never ask an artist to talk about their work in 18 minutes. It is torturous, absolutely torturous. But I'm going to try to do it. I'm going to try to sort of show you some work and develop a little bit of a way of thinking in a way that I work that maybe will make some sense after 18 minutes. The other thing is I was so afraid that you wouldn't like me that I thought I'd intimidate you into liking me, so I wore all black. I wanted to play the part of the artist. I'm going to start with some very early work from 1986, a project called House Monument. Now, the reason I'm starting with this is because for 18 years, I collaborated with my late partner, Kate Erickson, who died in 1995. And I wanted to show a couple works that we did together as collaborators, and one of the reasons that we collaborated was because we believed in the idea of community, having a sense of community and working with community. And the idea of having two people collaborate together on something was this idea that it was the symbolic beginnings of a collaboration. And so that to us was very important. So for 18 years, we collaborated, and I'm going to show you two projects and explain them, but then I'm going to show you a couple other projects very quickly, and then I'm going to go into some newer work, and hopefully I'll get through it all by the time my 18 minutes is up. First project's House Monument. We were invited to teach at the University of California in Los Angeles, at UCLA, for 1 year, and while we were there, we were invited to do a project at an institution called Los Angeles Institute of Contemporary Art. And so we spent the whole year primarily looking into or collating and collecting quotes about the idea of house and home. We knew we wanted to do a project about the idea of house. We collected about 1,500 quotes from all different types of literature, psychological writings, architectural writings, and then we knew that we were going to have an exhibition at this space, and we put together a material list from an 1,800 square foot, an average size house, 1,800 square foot house, all the joists, all the 2x4s, all the lumber that would be on the understructure. And what you're looking at is the entrance to the gallery, and what we did is we hand wrote every quote that we found on the lumber. And so you could walk into the exhibition, you could pick through it like a lumber yard and actually read the quotes. Most of the quotes are about the general idea of house and home, but some of them were very specific to the spaces of the house, like the bedroom, the kitchen, and so on. So you kind of moved through the exhibition and were able to read quotes about particular rooms all the way to the roof and attic. There were also an area called, an area that also dealt with the basement as a very kind of, interesting enough, a very psychological space to a lot of people. Now, while it was up in the gallery, one of the ways that we engaged people, we did a number of house projects. I'm going to show you a couple really quickly and not talk about them, but just sort of visual candy a little bit. But while it was up, we advertised in the Los Angeles Times, and we looked for somebody who was interested in buying this lumber. Well, actually, we wouldn't have sold it, but Leica was going broke, and they made us pay for our exhibition. So we invested about $6,000 in this lumber, and we couldn't afford to hand that down to someone else. So what we did is in order to entice someone, we priced it at half price. So we were going to sell this $6,000 worth of lumber for $3,000 to someone who would actually build a house with it. And we were lucky enough to find a couple who were building a house by themselves, Ron and Diane Catablau in Costa Mesa, California, and they became the second part of this project. That little boy actually was in an art class at UCLA recently, and the teacher started talking about this project, and he completely flipped out. So, anyway, so this couple bought the lumber. They weren't interested in it as an artwork, which didn't really matter to us. The rule was that they had to use 80% of the lumber. They had to actually cover it up at the end of the project, and that was it. And what happened is the house took about a year to build. And they said it really did slow them down because they'd stop and read every quote before they cut into it. So we probably ended up costing more than $3,000 in the end than what he saved. So here it is, being built, covered up. And this is the completed house. It still exists today in Costa Mesa, California. Now, I show this project because it also talks about a way of thinking and working. And one of the things that, if you're a sculptor like I have been trained, then the discussion revolves around the idea of the monument. And the monument sits in a particular place and symbolically speaks of that place. But it's usually bronze. It's usually sort of an abstraction of something that it wants to monumentalize. Well, Kate and I thought, well, can't we build a monument that actually is a living monument? How can we create a work that actually speaks about the thing that it's speaking of and is what it is? It is what we're monumentalizing. So we sort of figured this out, and this is what we came up with, the House Monument Project. Now, one of my big influences is an artist by the name of Gordon Matta Clark. When you're studying in the Midwest like I did at Kansas City Art Institute, you don't see a lot of the real thing. What you see are things that are coming through the magazines. And there were a couple artists that were being talked about a lot in the 1970s. Gordon Matta Clark, Mary Miss, Alice Aycock. Different types of ways of working. In this case, the reason I wanted to show this slide as an illustration was the idea that this project, Split House, Four Corners, done in 1974, when he split that house, it became an art material. It became a carving. It became something else. And that's a very different thing than what Kate and I were trying to do with House Monument. It was sort of like still the idea of like actually working with particular conventions that exist in a particular place and trying to infiltrate ourselves as artists into that particular situation. So I'm going to show you a couple real quickly, a couple other projects, only because I want to talk about the nature of house and home. Kate and I did about 15 different projects. No longer interested in doing house projects after her death. I sort of moved on, but very quickly, talking about certain social conventions. The Red House, in the midst of a sea of beige and white houses. The front lawn, thinking about the stage or the idea of the lawn as a stage. Unplanted landscape, where we had a house that had no landscape plants. We bought them the landscape plants if they allowed us to keep it in the root balls for 1 month as an exhibition. Half slave, half free. We actually paid someone not to mow their lawn for 8 weeks. On half, just half. And he loved it. And this is called Peaks and Valleys, and it's all the names of the San Francisco streets on the roof of a house. So we literally sort of built the house from painting, landscaping, to roofing it. Oh, we took the doors off, and one of our more well-known works is Camouflage History, done in Charleston, South Carolina. They all have a history. There's a reason why we did it. I don't have the time to get into it. If you're interested, you can look further into it, but Camouflage History really dealt with specifically Charleston at the time that we did this project. It's based on a color chart called The Authentic Colors of Historic Charleston. It's all 72 colors. The US military actually designed the camouflage pattern for us. The next project I want to talk about that Kate and I did is from 1989, and it's a project called Loaded Text. The way that we would work is we'd research areas, we'd go in and we'd try to learn as much as we could about them. And in this case, there was something, we'd also spend a lot of time just looking around, like seeing what's happening and what's going on. And we noticed that City Council was replacing all the cracked sidewalks downtown. And we'd also tap into the newspaper and we'd try to find out what's going on. So we lived in New York, but we'd have the newspaper sent to us. And one day we noticed that the City Council had just passed a draft plan for downtown revitalization. And they mentioned in the article that they were going to put 2 copies in the library. Well, we asked if we could actually see a copy of it. And they agreed, they obliged, and they let us read it. And we thought, well, this is pretty important. I mean, everyone should know what's going on here, so maybe we can somehow integrate this into an artwork. So we took the 65-page text. We found a section of sidewalk that needed to be replaced. We had a $10,000 budget that was coming from the Durham Arts Council, and we decided to do a project. Here we are writing, or Kate is writing, 1 page from the 65-page text, which turned into a performance for a whole week on our hands and knees writing the 65 pages. It did become very public because the public became very angry at us, but it wasn't necessarily our fault, but we did learn a lesson that as artists we're responsible and we should talk to the community before we do these projects. We thought the newspaper would disseminate the information, and they didn't do it, or they did it to sensationalize it and that's where the anger occurred. So then what we did is we hired a contractor to come in, break it up in one-man pieces, load it into dump trucks, and we parked it in front of the Durham Arts Council for about 4 or 5 days while there was a public art conference, a national public art conference taking place. And at the end of the project, the pieces became riprap in a stream bed downtown that was eroding. And with our money, we did this civic gesture. We replaced that sidewalk. And that's it. There's no plaque or anything else. I just recently got an email, literally just 2 weeks ago, from someone in Houston who was recently in Durham, saw the sidewalk and saw the rubble. It's still there. This was done in 1989. What I like about this project, and what's important about it in relationship to my work, and the way I'm thinking as an artist, is how do we infiltrate systems that are already in place? I don't need to build anything. I don't need to make anything. I need to see what's out there, and how can I integrate myself as an artist into those systems, into those conventions. This sidewalk would have been replaced at some point, but what we did is we just, as artists, decided to make it an artwork in the process of that happening. Another project that I really like, which is in the same line, is a project called Half Monument, Half History. Swiss Rail was going to clean the rail station in Biel-Bienne. We were part of an exhibition there. We asked them not to clean, only to clean half, to draw a line down the middle, only clean half, allow it to stay that way for the duration of the exhibition, and then at the end they could clean the rest of it, which they obliged and they did. Okay, the next couple of pieces are my pieces. After Kate's death, I had basically what happened is I lost my career because we were collaborators. I had to rethink everything. So I spent 10 years kind of working on different ideas and certain things. And I came across, before we had sort of collected air, but I found myself getting more and more esoteric. I didn't want to deal with people. I was sort of hidden in my studio. But I slowly got out of that cocoon and I kind of moved on, realizing that the best thing I do is work with people. And so this is a project where, it's not important. It just sort of illustrates an idea that I started doing these things where I was collecting air. What I loved about the idea was it's so ephemeral, and it can create meaning in so many different ways. If you think about the packaging, the way in which it's collected, where it's collected, and so it led me into a whole series of works, and I'm gonna show you those works and end with them. Can you see that? Because I can't see it here, is it? It's the Alamo. And in any case, I did a project where I collected air around Texas. I lived in Texas, in Austin, Texas for 10 years, and I was very interested in the whole idea of death and mythology. So I did a project where I collected air around the state of Texas. I worked with a historian. We figured out all the places in which there was death and the idea of death as being this major thing in the history of Texas, which sort of interested me. And I put all that air into a compressor, and then I hired a balloon artist to create hats. This is probably the closest I'll ever get to painting, but this is an exhibition that I did in the gallery where the air from those historic sites went into these giant hats having a lot to do with identity in Texas and so on. And this is how they ended up. Now, the interesting thing about the exhibition was it's called Hold Your Breath. The air in those balloons actually, it comes out into the space, and they shrivel up. From that was a project I did at Ontario, University of Ontario, or University of Toronto in Canada, and it was a library. And I was thinking about knowledge and all that stuff, and somehow I wanted to fill the empty spaces because I couldn't understand why a library would have empty spaces in the library. So I did a whole series of collecting students' breath and having them draw faces. And then what happened is they also collapsed as well, so it took on this other character. I really liked this project a lot, but it wasn't quite there yet. So the project that I really want to talk about is Breathe In, Breathe Out. I was invited by Salina, Kansas, the Salina Art Center, which is kind of a community-oriented art center. It's one of the best in the country. And it's a community of about 50,000 people, but everyone knows about it and everyone participates in it. And it's really wonderful because they've educated the public in a way that I think they understand art and they're not afraid of art, particularly contemporary art. What you see here is the Breathe In, done in neon. It's actually the handwriting of the incoming mayor. breathe out is the handwriting of the outgoing mayor. And what I asked people to do was to actually blow into a balloon, sign their name, and then put it on these things called the breath collection devices. Now, this project had to operate in 2 different places. So I used it, I had wheels, I had a trailer, a 16-foot trailer in which the tank was on. And it had to operate in the Salina Arts Center. At the same time, it had to operate in a festival that takes place every year in Salina. And so it kind of had to have this, I had to figure out a way in which I could do this. So anyway, the project went through the, excuse me, the project went through the collecting of the breath. We were able to collect about 4,000 samples of community breath. Everyone had to sign the tank. All the spent balloons were hung on the wall in the gallery, in the museum. And at the end of the summer, in which the exhibition ended, we had what was called the Big Blowout. And we asked everyone who was interested to come over and have community air to fill up their car tires. The police came, the mayor came, some kids brought some balls. And my favorite is I convinced, because it was Friday Night Lights, it was the first football game of the season, and we convinced the coach to let us deflate and inflate the ball with community air. And they actually announced it. I was beaming. They announced it at the football game, and I was very happy about that. Very quickly, because I'm running out of time, but a project called Downtown Mixer, in which I was invited to participate not participate, but actually do a project for an organization that normally works in a park down there. But the director knew that if they invited me, I'd never work in the park, that she wanted me to work in downtown, and she knew that I would do that. Now, if you've ever been to Houston, you know that the corporate culture is very strong there, and the idea that you go into a building and you never come out. I mean, you can go through tunnels and all that, but there's no one on the street. It's sort of like Dallas. And anyway, so I created this project called the Downtown Mixer, in which I convinced 8 different buildings to let me come in and ask the people in those buildings to give me a breath sample, but draw a self-portrait as well. Each building was color-coded. And these are some of the collection of the balloons. We went for 3 days. It was very difficult trying to get people to participate. In fact, I had one person walk by me and scream at me and say, I should get a real job. But we had some great volunteers, and we were able to pull together about 1,600 breath samples and self-portraits. And you can see how, at the end, what we did, I'm sorry, I sort of messed this up, but we integrated them back into the buildings, but we mixed all the colors and all the balloons. And so this is the project that we ended up with. And here you can see it sort of integrated into the corporate culture. It was really meant to kind of be a critique of that culture and the way that it operates, and to kind of bring in something that would be at odds to that normal system. And again, they also collapsed. If I may, I'm out of time, but I'm going to leave you with 2 images. And this was a Marine that I commissioned to collect air for me in Iraq. And I wrote him, I'd never met him, and I said, would you do this? I'll pay you X, and this is what you have to do. You have to send me an image back, and you have to collect the air and send the bottle back, the jar back. And at the end, when President Obama announced that the war had ended, I asked him if he would meet me at the Geographic Center of the US in South Dakota, and to release the air, and he obliged. Of course, I paid him, but he was more than willing to, and it was the first time I met him, and he was a wonderful young gentleman, and we had a great discussion about the military, and his role in the military was sort of interesting. But I'm not going to say anything about this. I'm going to leave you with this, and thank you very much.